Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. I'm hosting it today with the topic of Skyrocket your e-commerce. So we will be focusing on how e-commerce, how shopping experiences can be improved through user or customer testing. Just a short information beforehand, this session will be recorded. So I guess it shouldn't be a problem, as usually no personal information is visible here in this view. There's no option of anybody to switch on their videos on themselves. And if there will be a discussion, we will ask you beforehand if you want to join. So yeah, just in terms of how we organize this webinar, please use the Q&A questions or the Q&A button if you have any questions relating to the content of this webinar. And please use the chat function for any technical issues that might be arising, or if you have anything else that you would like to share. Yeah. So I guess everybody can see my screen and my presentation for now. I'm just figuring out the technical details. Sorry. A brief introduction here to myself and Stefan, who's also one of the hosts of this webinar. We are both from with a background from the Technical University of Berlin. We did a lot of user-centered research and always used eye tracking during our university career to find out how users interact, how customers interact with products in a digital space. And we always used eye tracking to find that out. So that's why you will see that a lot of this webinar will be focusing on eye tracking data. We had the idea of starting a company based on that in 2018, together with our co-founder, Klaas. We are based in Berlin and currently have a round of 12 people working on Oculid's mission here. And what that is, I will go into detail in a minute. As I said, eye tracking has always been one of our key interests. And as it is also essential to the webinar, I would like to ask you in a poll how many people have experience with this, because it might give me a hint on where to go into details during the presentation. Okay. I will share a brief information on Oculid before we go into the actual use case, so that you can place the information that I'm providing to you a little bit better. And it's also easier to understand the use cases when you know sort of what's at the center of our interest. I'm just publishing the poll. Interestingly, around half of the people have experience using eye tracking, half not. So that's a bit of a challenge for the presentation, but just ask when there's anything that is of particular interest to you and that you might not understand. So yeah, Oculid as a company, our mission is to support other companies, agencies, market research institutes in understanding how users or customers interact with products, brands, or services on mobile phones. So it is always a focus on mobile phones, and it is also a focus on eye tracking, which is not explicitly mentioned here, but that gives us a lot of detail into the actual interaction. Just for those of you who do not have explicit experience in eye tracking, so in the past and also still today, eye tracking is usually done with external hardware. So you have a bar that you attach to a screen, or glasses that people wear during a study. Attaching a bar to the screen is usually done when you have a setting that is just digitally takes place on a screen in a web browser, or you display images. And these glasses are usually used for example, shopper insights, point of sales studies, where you want to see how people interact in the real world. And then you, what you get is a video of what the person watches, where the person walks, overlaid with the gaze of that person. In both cases, the hardware is pretty expensive. It's about 20,000 euros that you often still have to invest to get good hardware to run eye tracking studies. And that's also why there's a lot of attempts of making that cheaper, more accessible, because it also limits the number of participants and the size of the studies that you can run when you have this super expensive equipment that nobody has at their homes. So over the last couple of years, there have been a lot of implementations of webcam eye tracking using browser plugins and webcams, but there has been very little progress in using the selfie cameras of smartphones for eye tracking. So that's where we specialized at Oculid, because we find that more and more traffic is actually moving to the smartphone. Even in e-commerce, more than 50% is nowadays done on mobile phones. So we see that this is a big market where we need improvement of the experience, which needs like deeper insights into the cognitive processes that are taking place here. And that's why we focused on making eye tracking on smartphones possible using just the devices of the user with no external hardware, so that you can basically run studies wherever you like in the world. And that you can use anybody sort of as a participant, because you don't have that hardware problem. You don't have to invite people to the lab, which limits the number of people who would be willing to do this. The way we do the way we enable such studies is by like a twofold product. We have a platform, which I will show to you in a minute when I present the use cases, where you can design studies that use a URL or a video or an image that should be tested. You specify the task that people should be working on, and then invite people to take part in your study. When you invite people, you send them an invitation directly to their mobile phones. People download the app that we provide at Oculid, and in that app automatically open your particular study. So there's a key, and participants will directly be guided to a test which they complete on their mobile phones, held in a natural position. And then participants have the chance to upload the data. And as soon as the first person has done that, you can have a look at their data in the platform. So just as a first introduction for you to the topic that we will be covering when we talk about the use cases. In this webinar, we will focus on e-commerce use cases, as these are a good example of what can be done in eye tracking. However, advertising tests, video tests, packaging tests are also possible. It's actually a similar setup. It's just that there's a variation in the stimulus that you use. In an e-commerce test, you use a URL. In an advertising test, you would rather upload an image or a video, depending on what you test. And similarly, in a packaging test, you would also upload an image. Yeah, just to give you a brief idea, and then I would like to jump into the use cases that I'm presenting today. It's actually a couple of different tasks that we gave to participants within one overall study, just for demonstration purposes, obviously. I mean, normally we wouldn't be testing different web shops within one test. But we thought that it would give a good overview over what's possible to achieve. So before we jump into the platform, for this test, we had 40 participants, and they actually performed 4, not 3 tasks. The first one was an A/B test, which has also been featured in the invite for this webinar, where we benchmarked 2 different e-commerce shops against each other, which is a common field of application if you want to compare yourself, for example, to a competitor and see what works well in your platform and what does not work as well as you would like it to be. But of course, you can also have a look only at your own web shop, which we will be focusing on in the second part of this talk. And then as a last part, we will be giving an overview over 2 simpler studies where we just evaluated the landing page of H&M and an Instagram post, which is more and more used for e-commerce these days also. Okay, that is what is coming up in the next couple of maybe 30 minutes. Before we jump into the results and what you can actually find out with this study, I would like to give you an idea of how that was implemented. And for that, I'm briefly jumping to the platform. Just a second. So this is the platform as you would see it if you just log in as a researcher and want to design a study. So here is a couple of studies that you might have designed in the past, and I have saved as a draft the way in which we did our e-commerce test. And I will first go into this one. So I have prepared it beforehand so that we don't have to go through it in all details. We have specified here at the top that it is a test with 40 participants. Time limit is always 15 minutes for the entire eye tracking related tasks. There's a short welcome message for the participants. And then there's here in the center of the page, there's the different tasks that are being posed to the participants. So first of all, there's this A/B test where people are asked to look for a sustainable hoodie, either on ASOS or on Zalando. So this is an A/B task where half of our or roughly half of our 40 participants get the display of ASOS and half of the participants get to see the Zalando page, but they basically have the same tasks, so, which can be completed on both. We have not timed this task, but rather asked people to complete the task once they are done with it, when they think they have completed it, and then jump to the next question. We have in parallel recorded thinking aloud. So that means that participants are asked to verbalize what they are thinking while they are completing this this task, and we have asked people how easy they thought they could be completing this task afterwards. And remember, this is half of the people doing ASOS, half of the people using Zalando. In the second task, we have an example of this Zara online shop where we only have one online shop, as I said, and in this task, it's really more about user empathy, so understanding what's going on in the user, rather than comparing it on a quantitative level between different designs. The third and the fourth tasks were once an Instagram ad, as I said, which was timed. So this was really targeted at the first impression that people get. Where do they focus first when they get to see this ad? Because that's sort of typical when you scroll through a social media post or a social media feed. You don't really know what what to expect, what comes up next in your feed, and what people view as the first thing is extremely important because they might be scrolling past it pretty quickly. And then there's this landing page example of H&M, and there's also the opportunity to ask quick questions beforehand. Actually, this is displayed before the tasks are displayed, and yeah, that's basically how the study was designed. Okay, I will go to the overview page from here, and before I jump into like the results of the different tasks, I would like to briefly go back to the presentation. Just a second, I'm there in a minute. So the first task, as I said, was this AB, the sustainability match. We asked participants on both Zalando and ASOS to look for a recycled hoodie. And we did this in this task because we find that eye tracking studies or these remote studies are usually most valuable to you when you have a very precise question in mind that you want to be answered. And that's usually also like how the research cycle goes. If you have a complex page, like an e-commerce platform, you don't really want to know what is the overall impression, but how do users relate to a certain function in the task, of course. So we wanted to find out how efficient it is for customers to look for recycled fashion on both Zalando's and ASOS. And we did this in a quantitative fashion. So we recorded task duration, the number of fixations, the average fixation durations, and how people rated the ease of the task completion. And we also had a look at a screen recording, so in a qualitative manner to see like where are there problems arising that could be explaining the quantitative findings that we have. So in this task, we really combined the two, quant and qual. I am jumping back to the platform to show the results here. Just a second. Okay, so we ran this test here, and I'm just switching to the dashboard and just to give you an overview. So we have some quant data, some quantitative data here in different tables with the option to visualize it, to get an overview. But we also have this function here to the side where you can watch the individual recordings and watch summary data if you have a static stimulus like an image, for example. But for the first task, I would like to first go into the quantitative data, because that might give us a first impression on this question, like where was this task more efficient to complete? And of course here, remember that this really only relates to our precise research questions. So what is, where can people find a more sustainable hoodie? It doesn't give any overall valuation to any of the two platforms. In our experiment, A was ASOS, group A, and group B was the Zalando group. And we see here in this task view, so we have task 1, which was the sustainable fashion one. We have the groups A, which is ASOS, and B, which is Zalando. And we see that people rate the ASOS platform with regard to, or the ease of completing this task on the ASOS platform as substantially lower. So they find it more difficult to complete this task on the ASOS website. And that's rated right after people have performed these studies. So ASOS is rated with a 3.3, while Zalando is rated with a 2.4, which is pretty high given that it's a 5-point scale. And interestingly, the behavioral results as well as the eye tracking results show a very similar pattern here. So with regard to the ASOS platform, which is shown on the left here, I'm sorry, I can't, it's not possible on my screen to display the x-axis, but here on the left, it's ASOS, where people take pretty much 3 minutes on average to complete the task, while in the Zalando task, the exact same task is being completed in a little less than 2 minutes. And we see a similar pattern when we look at the fixations. So how often do people fixate a particular spot on the image or on the stimulus, in this case, on the e-commerce platform of ASOS or Zalando? So there's a lot of refocusing of the gaze, a lot more in the ASOS example as compared to the Zalando example. You would kind of expect that also, because if people take longer for a task, they naturally look into more places, refixate their gaze more often. And it's a similar thing with the tabs. There's much more interaction with the display on the ASOS task, which takes longer than on the Zalando task. But interestingly, we also see this very same phenomenon with regard to the fixation duration. So people who view the ASOS task, they have a lot longer fixations than people who view the Zalando page. For ASOS, it's 570 milliseconds, while it is a little more than 400 milliseconds for the Zalando page. So both are not particularly short fixation durations. If we would be seeing fixation durations in the area of maybe 300 milliseconds, we would be thinking, so then maybe longer fixation show more focus. But in this case, 500 milliseconds is pretty long. So we could be thinking that in the ASOS task, people just take more time to process the information as compared to in the Zalando task. So overall, on a quantitative level, we would be thinking that Zalando performed better with regard to this specific question as compared to ASOS. Because it's rated higher, people are more efficient, finding their targets more easily, show a more efficient fixation behavior than people on the ASOS page. But still, when we look into the recordings, which I will be switching to here, we see that for both pages, we can learn a lot about the user behavior and also learn where we could be improving the design with regard to this particular question. So one interesting finding that we see when we look into the recordings of the Zalando task is that people often go into the materials section after they have already selected a pullover. And maybe before we go into what can be improved at Zalando's, one quick summary. When we look at the recordings overall, we find that people use a lot a particular sustainability tag that is attached to the pictures in the Zalando page. And You will see it here in just a second. So I'm going into the individual recording of one person now. I slow it down a little. And switch from porthole to heat map so that you can see it better. So this is this sustainability tag, which people use a lot to orient on Zalando's page, and which makes probably this task a lot more efficient on the Zalando page as compared to the ASOS page, where there's no such tag which people are orienting towards in the first place. We see that a lot of people look at this particular tag. But then in particular with the Zalando page, we see that out of these 18 participants that complete the task, 7 participants spend a lot of time and a lot of effort in this details, material and care section, where they seem to be expecting more information on whether this sustainable hoodie is not only sustainable, but also made from recycled material. So we see that in 7 participants, which is really a big number, given that it's 18 people viewing the Zalando page. So same behavior here. Person going to the details and to the materials section, and then reading up on sustainability also, where there's no exact information onto what is the material. Is it recycled? Right. So that is what is pretty obvious in the Zalando example. We also see people in the ASOS example going to these materials part, but not as much as in the Zalando example. On the other hand, when we look at the details of the ASOS recordings of the people who saw the ASOS page, what is striking is that there's actually a very efficient way of getting to the point of filtering through the page and then completing the task, which we see here. So using the search function and then first selecting the kind of clothes that you want to buy, in this case a hoodie, and after you've done that, going to the filter section and selecting responsible. And once you've done that, you actually end up with only what the kind of products that you want to have. And we see here that people who use these efficient filters, they also show very efficient gaze behavior. They complete the task overall pretty quickly. And they are very successful in completing the task, but there's just a pretty large number of people who do not find this path. And then here's an example of somebody who first uses the search button, and then after this, there's not the same way of going through the filters anymore. So after that, we really see that this person gets lost, looks around a lot without ever getting to a point where he or she can go back to the filters and find out more about what he or she actually wants to filter, namely hoodies and recyclable. Yeah, so this is an example of a test where we combine sort of quantitative analysis, where we first establish what's more efficient, and then for both examples go into the details of how how did it get to these differences, and where do we see that the gaze behavior and the overall behavior deviates between the two groups where we find these differences. But of course, that's not always the case. Sometimes you want to find out just more about your own platform, and in particular, if you want to find out more about this, what we now call customer empathy, because I believe that's where eye tracking is a very, very valuable tool. If you want to like sort of look over your participants' shoulder to see what do people perceive when they use your platform, what is it that catches their attention in the first place, and then yeah, what is it that that is important to them. So we have this second question about the Zara test, where we want to know like what is important to customers and what attracts their attention and what not. If you think back of the task that we posed for the Zara task, that was also a very specific thing that people should be looking at. They should be selecting a white t-shirt in this case, and we after that looked at the screen recordings, tabs and fixations, but also listened to the thinking out loud, which unfortunately I can't present here due to privacy reasons, but it's a good combination of understanding what people are actually doing and what keeps them busy when they come to this store. So in this example that I would like to show to you, it's still the same test, obviously, but just the second task. I have prepared an example, for example, of tester 2. And I first want to show it to you, the recording without the actual gaze. So people are asked to go to the shop and look for a t-shirt. And this is the recording that we see of one participant. There's a video playing. Which is at the center of the screen for a pretty long time, as you have seen. And it's sort of natural to assume that people are following the video when it's being displayed while it's at the center stage here, and there's nothing much happening for a good couple of seconds. But when we look into the eye tracking data, and I switch to the porthole here, it is pretty striking that in this example, tester 2 is actually just trying to get past this video and looking all around it to find where do I get to my filters, where do I get to complete my task. And we see a similar behavior in a good number of other participants. So that is something that you wouldn't expect when you just look at the recording in the first place. And what's striking here is when you listen to the thinking out loud, in combination, you can really see how the person is looking to get past this video, actually, which in the first place you find so prominent on the page. And if we scroll back here, you see that there is men and kids to the side of the video as categories. And in this case, the participant is a woman, and she's actually looking, she's telling that she's looking for the women's section. And she doesn't realize that on this page, like, women is the default. She's already in the women's section, and men and kids is just something that you can switch to. But it's very hard for her to understand that, because she's looking for equivalent buttons to the ones that she's seeing. And we see that, for example, with a number of testers, as I said. In this case, we didn't count it, whereas we counted a lot of the behavior in the ASOS versus Zalando example, but you can basically see the same behavior for a lot of the participants. In this case, which is maybe interesting to add, is that you see here a different stimulus and image. So the site of Zara has changed during the course of our study, as of course we don't control that site, but if you were testing your own site, you would be making sure that everybody in the same time frame sees the same page. But even here, you see, though it's a different stimulus, it's not the video, it's images, you observe the same behavior for a couple of people. So this participant 9 and participant 14 is very similar to like just trying to get past that central image or central video, which is hindering the completion of the task. So what I've shown so far is really representative of a very particular task that people are instructed with, and that so it reflects sort of somebody coming to your page and having a mission in mind. I need to buy a white t-shirt, or I want to have a sustainable hoodie. Of course, that does not cover all use cases. It is very, very concrete. So it gives you very detailed information to this particular question. But sometimes you're also interested in finding out more about the first impression that people get. And that's what we implemented the next two tasks for. One last thing to add to the first two tasks, which I wanted to mention. These are e-commerce tasks which are fairly complex due to the scrolling through the site. People use filters, people use the search bar, and via this option, everybody ends up on a slightly different subpage. So it's very hard to automate the analysis up to now. So you usually go through the videos one by one, which gives you very good detailed information into the qualitative nature, understanding the users. But of course, it is to some extent time consuming. It will take you, or let's say for the two tasks that we analyzed, it took one researcher roughly 2 days to go through the videos and analyze them. So you can also do quant analysis, but you have to score it manually. And with the studies that I will be presenting next, there's this option of having a more automated analysis, because it's a more standardized, less complex question that we are looking at. So I will be talking together about the H&M and JD Sports tasks, which one is a landing page and one is a social media post, which is designed to attract customer attention. And in this task, we just used like screenshots, so images. There's not a lot of interaction. We have timed it, so people viewed the task for, or these images for 6 seconds to really capture the first impression that it gives to them and what attracts first attention. And in this case, it is possible, because it's so standardized, to have an automated quantitative analysis of the data, which I will briefly show to you at the end of this webinar. Just a second, while I'm switching screens. So remember, in this case, everybody got the instruction to just look at the landing page and subsequently as at the social media post, and the display ended after 6 seconds. And what we derive from that data is heat maps, where most of the attention of the different users was. So we can see the 2 examples here, and yeah, they are summarized here. Interestingly, we see that in the H&M example, most of the attention is on the sale that is being displayed here, not a lot of attention on the logo. And we could be defining those areas of interest, as we call that in eye tracking studies, and analyze them quantitatively. So I could be defining my H&M logo, or here my JD Sports logo, as areas of interest, and then analyze how much attention does this get, how many participants look at it at all, how much time do they spend on it, and how long does it take them to look at this area of interest in the first place, so that I get to understand better what attracts attention, immediate attention, when people first are presented with my online shop. Of course, you could be defining anything as an area of interest. So if it's maybe not the logo that is so important for you in a specific case, but if you want to know, do people see my discount at all? Is that something that gives them an incentive to buy the product? Then you could be defining that as an area of interest. And with like the time to first fixation, you would be interested in like, how salient is that? Is it something that grabs immediate attention? With the dwell time, you would be looking at, is it something that really captures attention and that invites people to stay here and to explore that in more detail? While, yeah, the percentage of people looking at it at all, of course, gives you an idea of how relevant it is over a bigger number of people. Okay, I've come towards the end of what I wanted to tell. I can see that there's a question coming in. One person asked, can I also test prototypes? Yes, you can also test prototypes. If I go back to the platform, just a second. Just a second. Let me share my screen again. So when you design an experiment here and create a task, let me just create a new task for this purpose. Task 5 in my example, you can specify either an image or a video that you want to display, or you can specify a URL. So this is how we have realized these tests using ASOS and Zalando and Zara, but you could also specify the URL for a prototype, and then your participants could also be clicking through the prototype, so you would get the exact same data, just in a much more standardized environment where, yeah, you control, like what I said about the Zara example, that wouldn't happen, of course, that you in one case see a video and in a different case see a image in one place. So actually using prototypes is a very neat way to make the test much more reliable. Right. I hope that answered the question. Is there anything else? Any more questions that I could be answering? If not, I'd like to thank you for the attention. Also, of course, I'm available for questions afterwards. We will be sending out an email with a recording, and of course, if there's anything else that you would like to know about the product or about eye tracking on smartphones in general, feel free to contact me anytime or book a demo so that you can learn more about the options and advantages. Thanks a lot. And I'm hoping to see everybody again at the next webinar. Goodbye.